Okay.
And now one of the most respected investors in America is going to tell you about his secrets.
Warren Buffett. It's the sound of money.
$9.2 Warren Buffett, the second richest man in America.
He's estimated to be worth about $62 billion, makes him the richest man in the world.
You know, Buffett is not exactly what you might expect. Even though he's in the money business, he doesn't even own a calculator or a computer.
He takes the long view, and it's made him billions, many billions.
Maybe you can beat the House, but I don't think you can beat Warren Buffett.
Buffett filed his first tax return at 13 years old.
But he's no average billionaire, Tom.
No, he certainly isn't, Matt.
He's a $44 billion average Joe.
Warren Buffett has an approach that doesn't make him very popular with his fellow billionaires.
Warren Buffett, the boy from Nebraska who grew up to become the Wizard of Omaha.
What was it about him that allowed him to become the richest man in the world? How did he do it?
70 years ago, I was in high school, almost a third as long as the country has been around. And when I was in high school, I really only had two things on my mind: girls and cars. and I wasn't doing very well with girls, so we'll talk about cars. But let's just imagine that when we finish, I'm going to let each one of you pick out the car of your choice. Sounds good, doesn't it? Pick it out, any color, you name it. It'll be tied up with a bow, and it'll be at your house tomorrow. And you say, well, what's the catch? And the catch is that it's the only car you're going to get in your lifetime. Now, what are you going to do knowing that that's the only car you're ever going to have and you love that car? You're going to take care of it like you cannot believe. Now, what I'd like to suggest, you're not going to get only one car in your lifetime, but you're going to get one body and one mind. And that's all you're going to get. And that body and mind feels terrific now, but it has to last you a lifetime. On the way to the office, it's all of a 5-minute drive. Been doing it for 54 years. One of the good things about this 5-minute drive is that on the way there's a McDonald's, so I'll pick up something.
Good morning. Thank you for choosing McDonald's. Go ahead and order whenever you're ready.
I'll have a sausage McMuffin with egg and cheese.
Anything else?
That's it. Thank you. And I tell my wife, as I shave in the morning, I say either 261, 295, or 317. And she puts that amount in a little cup by me here, and that determines which of 3 breakfasts I get. Okay, 295. There's
How
the
you
2.
doing, sir?
Hey, great. You're on candid camera.
I see. Hello, everybody.
When I'm not feeling quite so prosperous, I might go with the 261, which is 2 sausage patties, and then I put them together and pour myself a Coke. Hi, how are you? 317 is a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit, but the market's down this morning, so I think I'll pass up the 317 and go with the 295. I like numbers. Started before I could remember. It just felt good working with numbers. I was always playing around with numbers in one way or another, and it was fun to have a bunch of guys over and have them betting on which marble would reach the drain first. I had a lot of energy as a kid. I was inquisitive, and I was the youngest one always in the class because I'd skip. I've always been competitive. I like to read more than most kids. I really like to read a lot. My Aunt Edie gave me a copy of the World Almanac, and that was heaven to me. And I can still tell you that almost population was 214,006 in 1930. Some numbers just kind of stick with you. And very early, probably when I was 7 or so, I took this book out of the Benson Library called 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. And one of the ways in this book was having penny weighing machines. And I sat and calculated how much it would cost to buy the first weighing machine and then how long it would take for the profit for that one to buy another one. And I would sit there and create these compound interest tables to figure out how long it would take me to have a weighing machine for every person in the world. I had everybody in the country weighing themselves 10 times a day, and me just sitting there like John D. Rockefeller weighing machines. The allowance when I was a little boy was a nickel a week, but I liked the idea of having a little more than a nickel a week to work with, and I went into business very early. I started selling Coca-Cola door to door. I sold gum door to door, or sold Saturday Evening Post, Liberty Magazine, Ladies Home Journal, you name it. I think I enjoyed the game almost right from the start. But I like being my own boss. That's one thing I liked about delivering papers. I could arrange the route I wanted. Nobody was bothering me at 5 or 6 in the morning. I was delivering 500 papers a day, and I made a penny a paper, but in terms of compounding, that penny turned into something else. Einstein is reputed to have said that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world or something like that. And it goes back to that story you probably learned when you were in grade school, where somebody did something for the king, and the king said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Well, let's take a chessboard and put 1 kernel of wheat on the first square, and then double it on the second and double it on the third." And the king readily agreed to it. And by the time he figured out what 2 to the 64th amounted to, he was giving away the entire kingdom. So it's a pretty simple concept, but over time, it accomplishes extraordinary things.
Berkshire is an amazing company. It's 4th largest company in the Fortune 500. He is the only person who has ever, from scratch, built a company that is in the top 10 of the Fortune 500.
Well, Berkshire is a holding company of sorts. It owns a large number of separate businesses that operate independently of each other and to a great extent from the parent company, Berkshire Hathaway. We have maybe 70, maybe 80 businesses, and we ask them to behave in a way that doesn't hurt our reputation at Berkshire Hathaway, but they run their own lives. Other people do most of the decorating of the office, so various things come in. Originally, when I moved in 1962, you can see this. I went down to the South Omaha Library, and I think for $1, I got 7 copies of old New York Times from big times like the Panic of 1907. This is one, 1929, obviously. But I wanted to put on the walls days of extreme panic in Wall Street, just as a reminder that anything can happen in this world. I mean, it's instructive art, you can call it. I was born in 1930 here in Omaha, Nebraska, during the stock market crash. My dad lost his job in 1931, a year after I was born. He was a stock salesman, and he had what little savings he had in the bank, and so he started his own company. He worked right through the Depression.
He had an investment company, and as an adult, when I look back, I thought, wow, did that ever take a lot of nerve? Sometimes we'd go down there on Sunday and we could play with the adding machine. My brother and I tended to play the games together. And I remember at one point, he said to me, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30 or something like that. It was totally outside of anything my family had experienced, but it just was unusual that way.
Well, I was the oldest, and then my brother, and then my sister. And my father would go to New York periodically to check on businesses and stocks and things like that. When he'd come back, he always had a costume for each of us, and Warren loved it. He was very good-natured. He was quiet. It was hard to tell he was a genius at that point. But, I mean, who was looking?
The first books I read on investment were actually in my dad's office. Pretty soon I read all the books in the office and read some of them more than once. My dad had various nicknames for me. He'd call me Fireball sometimes because I'd start little businesses. He didn't care about money at all. He believed very much in having an inner scorecard and never worry about what other people are thinking about you. You know, just do you know why you're doing what you're doing? That's good enough. I admired everything about him to the extent that I was absorbing lessons from him without knowing it. And the idea that all lives have equal value is something that all three of his children felt since I can remember. My dad at one point ran for Congress when I was 12 or so. It was a very Republican household. And I campaigned for him, my sisters campaigned for him. The whole family did. My mother was very, very bright, and she was very gregarious. She was a good campaigner for my dad.
She had a lot of ambition, and I think my brother Warren got a lot of his extreme competitiveness from my mother, actually.
She was brilliant at math. You know, I guess they still have these things where you crank them and things added up, and she could add it in her head faster than the machine could do it. She was absolutely amazing in that.
She was very dutiful about taking care of the kids, but you didn't get the same feeling of love. It was there, but it didn't come out the same way as with my dad.
In the nation, the only permanent way to prosperity is a balanced budget. Unless that goal is achieved, all post-war plans will collapse like Hitler's conquest.
You have heard Congressman Howard L. H. Buffett, Republican member of the House of Representatives from Nebraska.
When I was about 12 or 13, we moved to Washington, my family, and I was mad. I was having fun in Omaha. I lost all my friends, and now I moved to a town where they were all strange. And so I was very, very unhappy. At school, I just lost interest. I took pleasure in tormenting my teachers. At that time, for example, AT&T was the stock that all teachers owned for their retirement. And I decided that it would drive my teachers a little crazy if I went short the stock, because when you go short a stock, you're betting that it will go down. So I shorted 10 shares of AT&T and then brought the confirmation to school and showed these teachers that I was shorting the stock. They found me a big pain in the neck, but they did think I knew a lot about stocks. And then at home, my mother would have terrific headaches. And you didn't want to be around her when she was having the headaches. And she would lash out more. She would never do it in public.
Well, I think we were terrified of her. When I'd wake up in the morning, I'd listen to hear her voice. I could tell by her voice it was going to be a terrible day or not.
When she got difficult, the three children felt it. When I was at the low point, sort of, I decided that I would run away. So I talked two other guys into running away with me. We went out and we started hitchhiking. And then we got picked up by the highway patrol, and that scared the hell out of us. It's very interesting. My dad never really gave me help about doing this. But he finally said, you know, he said, you can do better than this. And just saying that, I mean, I felt I was letting him down, basically. So in all ways, he was teaching me. He never taught by telling me things. He just taught by example. He had unlimited confidence in me, even when I screwed up. And that takes you a long, long way. The best gift I was ever given was to have the father that I had when I was born. I didn't want to go to college. I was 16 when I got out of high school, and I was buying stocks. I mean, I actually was having a pretty good time, and I didn't see that really was much to be gained by going to college, but my dad kind of jollied me into it.
He had a roommate who was a friend of mine, and the roommate said it just drove him crazy because he studied all the time. When Warren would come in like 15 minutes before the exam and just ace his way through it.
I finished in 3 years because I had enough credits and I was in a hurry. I wanted to get out. When I got out of the University of Nebraska, I applied to Harvard Business School. They told me I was to get interviewed in a place near Chicago. I got there, and he interviewed me for about 10 minutes. And he said, forget it. You're not going to Harvard. And so now I'm thinking, what do I tell my dad? Yeah, this is terrible. And it turned out to be the best thing ever happened to me. Later that summer, I was looking through a catalog. And in the catalog, it had these names of people that were teaching. And one was Graham and another was Dodd. I had read this book by the two of them. So I wrote him a letter in mid-August. And I said, dear Professor Dodd, I said, I thought you guys were dead. But now that I found out that you're alive and teaching at Columbia, I would really like to come. And he admitted me. So, you know, that it just shows you never can tell.
Gentlemen, Professor Graham.
Ben was this incredible teacher. I mean, he was a natural, and he drew us all in.
Our Wall Street professionals are more accurate in the shorter term than the long-term forecast.
Well, our studies indicate that you have your choice between tossing coins and taking the consensus of expert opinion. And the results are just about the same in each case.
It was like learning baseball from a fellow who was batting 400. It really shaped my professional life.
There are two rules of investing, according to Warren, and he learned this from Ben Graham.
Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1.
Ben Graham basically coined the term value investing. He believed in careful scrutiny of a company's financial statements, and that if you bought value, it would eventually prove out.
A few years ago, I went to Amazon. And sure enough, they had this manual there. So, while reliving my youth, other guys were going to Amazon probably and buying old Playboys or something, but I bought old Moody's manuals instead. And when I got out of school, I started selling stocks. I was 20 years old at the time and looked about 16 and acted about 12. So I was not the most impressive salesperson anybody ever met. But what I would do was I went through page by page looking for possibly undervalued stocks.
Is this like going through an old family album?
Better. When I got out of business school at Columbia, I developed pretty decent skills in terms of business, but I hadn't really come to terms with the world exactly.
What were you like around girls back then?
Bad. I was sort of out of the swing of things there for a while. I went to my 60th reunion. There's a girl there. I took her out one time to the Uptown Theater in Washington, and I asked her whether she remembered what movie we saw, and she said, no, I don't remember that. And then she said, but I do remember one thing. And like an idiot, I said, what was that? And she said, well, you picked me up in a hearse. And it was true that I owned a half interest in a hearse when I was in high school, which was not the smoothest thing that, or coolest, as I would say now, the thing that you could do on a date. There were two turning points in my life. Once when I came out of the womb and once when I met Susie, basically. She was the girl, yeah. But it took her a little longer to figure out I was the boy.
I was going to be his younger sister's roommate at Northwestern. So I walked into their house and he was sitting in this chair and he made some sarcastic quip. So I made one back. I thought, who is this jerk? And that's how we met, yes. Listen, Warren is smarter than you even know. His brain is going all the time. And my dad said to me, now you have to understand about him. You're not going to have discussions with him like you would most normal people. But he has a heart of gold.
He was just totally enamored of her, and why not? And she of him. She'd sit on his lap all the time, and he'd stroke her hair. It was softening him. Susie was really kind, considerate, and she was the balancing force.
I just got very, very, very lucky. But I was a lopsided person, and it took a while, but she just stood there with a little watering can and just nourished me along and changed me. Somebody once said that the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. I had been terrified of public speaking. I couldn't do it. I'd throw up. And I knew if I didn't cure it then, I'd never cure it. And so I saw an ad in the paper to the Dale Carnegie course, which worked on developing your ability to speak in public. And I went down there.
Be sincere. A good smile has the same effect as a puppy's tail. When a puppy wags.
They made us do all these crazy things to get out of ourselves. And so we stood on tables and did all kinds of things. If I hadn't have done that, my whole life would have been different. So in my office, you will not see the degree I got from the University of Nebraska. You'll not see the master's degree I got from Columbia University, but you'll see the little award certificate I got from the Dale Carnegie course. As a matter of fact, every week, the instructor would give a pencil to whoever had done the most with what we'd learned the week before. And so in the fourth or fifth week, I proposed to her mother, and she said yes. And so that week, I won the pencil, and I also got engaged. I mean, it was an incredible week. One day it was kind of interesting because I couldn't see anything without my glasses, and I was so nervous that I just decided I'd take off my glasses and I wouldn't be able to see all those people out there. She was 19 when we got married, and I was 21. But she was so much more mature than I was, there's no comparison. She was a better person than I was. But when you get married, it's not a question of saying, I'm going to put a 14% factor in for humor and 17% for intellect and 22% for looks. It doesn't work that way. I knew it was the right decision, and it was.
You could live anywhere in the world. Why do you choose Omaha, Nebraska?
Yeah, I love it. I was born about a mile from here, and I've never had a bad experience in Omaha. Omaha and Nebraska are home to me. Everything about it seems like home. It's a pace, it's relationships. There's a lot of continuity, there's a lot of community, there's a lot of friendship. It's a very solid place and friendly place in which to grow up and in which to conduct a business. When I came back to Omaha, in early 1956. I had no idea what I was going to do. But a few months after I came back, some members of the family said, what should we do with our money? And I said, well, I'm not going back in the business of selling stocks, but if you would like to join me in a partnership, I said, I'll be glad to do it. So within a couple of months after coming back, I set up the first partnership. I wrote all the checks individually. I filed 11 income tax returns. I took delivery on stocks for all the different companies. I was a one-man band there for 6 years.
Warren would sit upstairs in his little office there, and I would bring up the name of a company, and most of the time he knew much more than I did about the company. He'd know how many shares were outstanding, he'd know the capitalization, he'd know the earnings. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, when Warren said something, it meant a heck of a lot. And I think all of us paid a lot of attention to Warren when he took a definite stand on something.
When I first met Warren back in 1959, I recognized immediately that he was a very intelligent person.
For the last 4 or 5 years, the stock market has been booming along and presumably forecasting better business, which has really not materialized. So maybe the stock market is really correcting a previous incorrect forecast this time rather than making a new correct one.
He made a lot of money buying thinly traded securities that were incredibly cheap statistically.
Warren was at that time dealing with small companies, and his investments often were to buy a company that you could figure was a discarded cigar butt, but it had one more smoke in it. And he wanted to buy at the right time to be able to benefit from the one smoke.
The first partnership started with $105,100. I put up the 100 and the other people put up the 105,000. And then at the start of 1962, I moved to Kiewit Plaza. And by the time I moved to Kiewit Plaza, we had $7 million invested, and a fair amount was profits. I was then renting a house. I never owned a house to that point. And then 2 years later, I bought the house I live in today in 1958. We had 3 children, Susie and I. And we had them young, incidentally, which was, I think,